Welcome to the deep dive. Think of this as our focused, really analytical study group session. We're diving deep into the required reading for those of you in PP 5340. That's Introduction to Public Policy and Management. And our text today, it's Chapter 9, Race and Social Equity, a nervous area of government.
That is quite a title. And, it really sets the stage perfectly for what we're trying to do here. We're not just skimming the surface. Our mission in this deep dive really is to pull out the concrete strategies that masters of public administration MPA programs well, that they need to adopt. To move beyond just, checking those superficial boxes on diversity plans, we're looking at how to actually confront that inherent racial nervousness that often comes up in these academic settings, especially when talking about systemic bias or affirmative action, and fundamentally about changing the organizational environment itself.
Right. And the source material kicks us off with a quote that, honestly, it's a necessary gut punch. It draws on Eric Liu from 2012. He said, arguing about affirmative action in selective colleges is like arguing about the size of a spigot while ignoring the pool and the pipeline that feeds it.
That analogy is pretty brutal because it forces us, really demands that we widen our lens, doesn't it? We tend to focus so intently on that point of entry, admissions, the spigot, and maybe feel like, okay, we've done our part. But this chapter argues quite strongly that until we look at the pool where the talent comes from and the health of the pipeline itself, which definitely includes the academic environment,
Yeah.
or just not tackling systemic change. And MPA programs, these are the places training our future public sector leaders. They absolutely have to set the standard for a healthy, inclusive pipeline.
Okay, so let's start unpacking the external push here, because this isn't just about programs suddenly feeling goodwill, right? There's a real powerful regulatory force involved, and that comes from NASPA. That's the Network of Schools of Public Policy Affairs and Administration. Huge accrediting body for public service education, holds a lot of sway.
A huge amount of sway, absolutely. Accreditation. It might sound like just bureaucratic stuff, ticking boxes, but it's a profoundly powerful way to bring about change. Rubai and Calarus back in 2012 noted that professional accreditation is a powerful force to motivate change. And why? Precisely because the standards are developed and enforced by peers. Programs take these guidelines seriously because, well, they come from the community they respect. It's self-policing in a way.
And what we saw with those 2009 NASPA accreditation standards, it was a very deliberate shift. It wasn't just about requiring numbers, counting heads at the spigot. The standards now explicitly demand that programs promote what was the phrase? A climate of inclusiveness for both faculty and students. That one phrase, climate of inclusiveness, it changes the whole game.
It really does. Because a climate requirement focuses on the internal experience, right? Not just the external recruitment efforts. The sources point to two specific standards where this is really spelled out. Standard 3.2, that covers faculty. It requires programs to promote diversity, inclusiveness in recruitment and retention. And retention, that's the key word there. It's tied directly to climate. How do you keep people once they're in?
And Standard 4.4 does the same for students. Requires promoting diversity and inclusiveness through recruitment, admissions, and those crucial student support services. It elevates support from just being a nice thing to do to an actual accreditation requirement.
Exactly. And what gives this real teeth, makes it stick? It's the NASPA self-study process itself. Programs going for accreditation or reaccreditation, they are forced to gather and present hard, specific data. They have to show their commitment by collecting and presenting data specifically on race, ethnicity, and gender. You just can't hide behind vague claims when you have to produce the spreadsheets.
Okay, so that focus on numbers, on data, it's necessary for tracking progress, sure. But the source material almost immediately pivots to critique what usually happens with these data-driven plans. What's the main problem with traditional diversity plans?
Well, the core critique is that these plans often suffer from, and this is a quote, a true lack of innovation and expansion in their methods. Over years, sometimes decades, this sticking to the same old strategies just results in common failures, and maybe more importantly, common excuses for those failures. The sources are pretty clear that this lack of innovation just leads to stagnation. The same few strategies get recycled over and over, whether they work or not.
I found the breakdown of those anecdotal rationalizations really interesting because, honestly, I feel like I've heard versions of them in almost every academic setting I've been in. These are the sort of defensive things faculty say when they're faced with low diversity numbers.
Exactly right. Based on, years of involvement, the sources kind of categorize these faculty statements. The first type is basically asserting effort without actually getting the outcome. So programs claim success because they did the appropriate posting of job ads, or maybe they had minority faculty in the pool, even if, at the end of the day, the hire was another white male. The effort itself becomes the benchmark, not the result.
And then you get the excuses that shift all the blame away from the program itself, the external barriers. This is where our programs cite things like geographic disadvantages, essentially claiming minority faculty members just don't want to come here.
Right. And here it could be anywhere. It could be a rural university. It could be a major city campus. It's such an easy out. Other external factors they mention include, economic conditions, maybe a lack of faculty retirement, so no jobs are opening up, or saying they just can't compete in the academic job market, especially against, say, big R1 institutions with more money.
Okay, so let's say a program director genuinely believes that location or lack of retirements is the main issue. Where does that external factor excuse meet their internal control? Where do the sources say they should be focusing?
That's the critical pivot point in the argument. While faculty might have limited control over, say, the national academic job market or regional demographics, they have almost total control over the program's climate. So if a program points fingers at external factors for recruitment failure, yet its own internal practices actively fail to create a welcoming environment, a failure of climate, then that program is still responsible. The sources argue pretty strongly that programs failing on climate might unintentionally be promoting institutional racism or sexism. Because the existing ways of doing things, the norms, they just reinforce the advantages of the majority culture. The focus has to shift from just recruitment, the spigot, to retention and environment, the pipeline itself.
Which brings us squarely to defining terms. If the core NASPA requirement is promoting this climate of inclusiveness, we absolutely need to get clear on the source's distinction between climate and culture. People often use them interchangeably, right? Just meaning the social context, but they operate at really different levels.
They absolutely do. They both describe that internal social environment, yeah, but culture. Culture is the much deeper concept, more entrenched. Culture refers to the deep structure of organizations. And because it's so foundational, it just takes far longer to change. It requires some really profound institutional soul searching.
Okay, let's break down that deep structure a bit more. The sources identify 5 essential components of organizational culture. What are they and how might they show up in, say, an MPA program?
Okay, first component, values. These are the judgments people make about what activities are seen as productive or good or maybe just wasteful. For instance, an MPA program might implicitly value quantitative research way more than qualitative research or community-engaged scholarship. This could lead faculty to see heavy service commitments, even crucial diversity work, as kind of a waste of time, something that distracts from tenure-track publications.
Got it. Second
are myths. This is the organizational folklore, the stories people tell. And often these stories act as warnings against trying to change things. An example of a myth might be, the story of that one faculty member who tried to integrate social equity too heavily into the core budgeting course and, was later denied promotion. That story, even if told casually, becomes a powerful deterrent. Keep your head down.
Third component.
Third, beliefs. These are people's fundamental understandings of how the organization actually works, regardless of the official rules. A belief might be something like, look, the only way to get real funding for a new diversity initiative is to catch the dean informally, maybe over golf, not by submitting through the formal proposal system. These beliefs dictate real behavior, whatever the policy handbook says.
Makes sense.
Fourth are traditions. These are those repetitive, significant events. Think about the annual faculty awards ceremony, the standard phrasing in graduation speeches, even where the program always holds its hiring candidate dinners. You have to ask, do these traditions actively celebrate diversity achievements? Or do they subtly ignore them? Do they just reinforce the majority norm year after year?
And the fifth component.
Fifth, and you could argue this is the most powerful day-to-day, are norms. These are the unspoken, informal rules of conduct. This covers everything. Who speaks first in faculty meetings? What's the acceptable level of disagreement? How quickly are emails supposed to be answered? A norm might be, we only really hash out curriculum changes informally in the hallway before the official meeting, which of course exclude anyone who can't be there for that unstructured insider chat time.
Okay, so that's the deep structure, the bedrock culture. Now contrast that with climate. The sources describe climate as much more malleable and situational. Climate is about the specific, measurable dimensions of the work environment right now, the day-to-day lived experience.
Exactly. And because climate is situational, it's very strongly linked to leadership. to immediate decision-making. Aspects of climate include things like, well, the organizational structure itself is decision-making top-down or more collaborative, standards of accountability or expectations clear and applied fairly. And crucially, communication. Is the language used direct? Is it open? Is it respectful when discussing differences?
So this suggests that if, say, a new program director comes in with a really clear, ambitious vision for diversity,
Right.
and that vision gets clearly linked to proactive daily strategies, the organizational climate could actually shift to reflect that vision much faster than the deep-seated culture would. It's kind of the difference between changing underlying assumptions versus changing operational procedures and daily interactions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the sources connect this to the attraction, selection, retention model, the ASR process. Schneider proposed this back in '87. The idea is that climate formation isn't random. It's deeply connected to who the program attracts in the first place, who they end up selecting, and then who they manage to retain. If the climate is unwelcoming or even subtly hostile, diverse candidates might just self-select out. That's the attraction part. If the climate is merely one of passive tolerance, maybe the wrong individuals get selected, people who fit the old mold. That's selection. And ultimately, the people who are retained will continue to shape and reinforce that existing climate, which is often not very inclusive. So a poor climate tends to perpetuate itself. It's a cycle.
Okay, so if the goal is breaking that cycle, establishing a genuinely inclusive climate, the first step before you jump into solutions has to be diagnosis. Understanding where you are now. The sources really stress this. The MPA program director has to make the cultural audit an undeniable strategic priority. You have to examine the current organizational culture, the status quo, warts and all.
Absolutely. And the audit isn't simple because, as Edgar Schein pointed out back in 2004, organizational culture operates on these three distinct levels. If you only look at the surface stuff, you're going to miss the deeper issues driving the problems.
Right. Let's start at that surface level then, the most visible one. Artifacts. What exactly are we looking for when we audit artifacts?
Artifacts were basically the things you can see, hear, or feel. It's the physical layout of the department, the signage, the logos, the observable signals people send. So you walk into the MPA program's hallway. What do the pictures on the wall tell you? What symbols are displayed? What about the program's website? If 95% of the faculty photos are non-minority men, that artifact sends a really loud, clear message about who belongs and who leads, regardless of what the diversity statement might claim.
Okay, makes sense. The next layer down gets a bit more sensitive. Values and beliefs. These are supposedly motivational, but the sources say they can also be restrictive. How so?
Right. Values and beliefs are what the organization says it stands for, or thinks it stands for. For example, a program might publicly espouse the value of work-life balance. That sounds great, right?
Mm.
But it might also hold the underlying belief that truly successful or committed faculty must work late into the evenings and be available on weekends. If that belief dictates behavior and expectations, it restricts the choices of, say, primary caregivers or faculty with significant external commitments. And that often disproportionately impacts women or minority faculty, even though the stated value sounds inclusive.
And then the deepest level, the hardest one to really get at, assumptions. These are the unconscious beliefs and feelings, the things so deeply ingrained they're just described as, the way we do things around here, the submerged part of the cultural iceberg.
Exactly. And you can't change what you're not willing to even acknowledge exists. These assumptions dictate so much organizational behavior without anyone consciously thinking about it. An unconscious assumption might be, for instance, that research focused on the local community, maybe addressing local equity issues, is somehow inherently less scholarly or less rigorous than highly theoretical work aimed at top-tier abstract journals. If that assumption influences promotion and tenure decisions, it systematically disadvantages certain faculty in certain types of crucial public service scholarship without ever needing an explicitly discriminatory policy on the books.
So the goals of this cultural audit are very practical then. First, look at those visible artifacts. Are they consistent with the values the program claims to hold? Second, identify conflicts between those stated beliefs and what actually happens in practice. Third, and this sounds like the toughest part, surface and really re-examine those deeply held, often uncomfortable assumptions. Ask, are they still valid? Do they serve our mission? And finally, develop a concrete action plan to address all the inconsistencies you find.
Precisely. The audit functions as a very specific gap analysis. It asks, what's the difference between the desired inclusive culture, the one NASPA is mandating, and the actual culture being experienced daily by faculty and students? And by framing this through the lens of public service values, which MPA programs are supposed to champion, this process forces faculty to confront their real priorities in a way that just looking at diversity numbers on a spreadsheet never could.
Okay, let's get really concrete now with the audit checklist itself. The sources give us 9 essential culture categories to scrutinize for these gaps. And for each gap, we need to think about corresponding climate actions. Let's walk through these, using Table 9.1 from the chapter as our framework.
Sounds good. Let's start with number 1, physical characteristics and general environment. So, beyond just the pictures on the wall, what about the symbols used? The program logos, the brochures handed out. Does the overall design language feel universally accessible and welcoming? A program really needs to ensure that the physical space and its representation doesn't unconsciously reinforce a sense of exclusivity or make certain diverse groups feel uncomfortable or unseen.
Okay, next up. Policies and procedures. These are the official written rules. We're talking mission statement, the student program guide, faculty search policies, the P&T documents, even the process for reviewing student applications. The key question here is diversity meaningfully integrated into the actual criteria for success? For instance, does the P&T policy require faculty to provide a diversity impact statement for their work, or is diversity just mentioned in a single sort of boilerplate paragraph that everyone knows can be easily ignored?
And crucially, we move from the written rule, the policy, to number 3, customs and norms. This is where those informal rules of conduct really live. Here, the audit looks at interaction patterns. How does the program director actually interact with different faculty members? How do faculty members treat students from various backgrounds? Is there a difference? A key question for norms is considering diverse faculty and student interests an active routine priority in every decision the program makes? Or is it something that always gets pushed to the end of the meeting agenda if it gets discussed at all?
Category 4 is curriculum. And the gap here often is this illusion of inclusion. Is diversity just sort of quarantined in a single standalone elective course, the diversity course that only a small fraction of students might even take? Or is diversity inclusion actively integrated throughout the required core courses, the ones every future public official has to master like public management, budgeting, policy analysis? That integration signals it's fundamental, not optional.
5th, and this is absolutely essential for the academic culture, is research. This really touches on that nervous area we keep mentioning, and we'll dig into it more. Is scholarship related to diversity and equity accepted as a respected, legitimate, tenurable area of research within the program? Or is it subtly, or maybe not so subtly, dismissed as soft or advocacy or not real public administration work? And related to that, is there tangible support and robust faculty advisement for students wanting to do diversity-related theses or dissertations? Or are they gently, or again, maybe not so gently, guided toward topics seen as more mainstream or marketable?
Okay, number 6, MPA Program Director Leadership Behavior. The director absolutely sets the tone. So, the audit needs to assess how they communicate the value of diversity. Is it just a once-a-year statement, or is it reinforced routinely in meetings, emails, decisions? What's the perception of their actual commitment among junior faculty especially? Do they regularly share and analyze the program's own diversity data, using it as a real diagnostic tool? Or is that data just collected, every 7 years for the NASPA accreditation visit and then filed away? The latter sends a pretty clear signal of low commitment.
7th, awards and recognition. A culture's true values are really revealed by what it chooses to reward. Are departmental diversity accomplishments formally recognized, maybe through specific service awards or public acknowledgement? Are contributions to diversity explicitly included in the formal criteria used for faculty and staff performance reviews? If the faculty member who champions diversity initiatives just gets loaded up with extra service work and receives no formal recognition or reward for it, the culture is clearly signaling that this work is seen as a burden, not something valuable.
Next, number 8, communication. How are messages about diversity actually transmitted, both formally in official documents, but also informally in the hallways, in committee meetings? What is the tone of conversation among faculty members during, say, search committee discussions about minority candidates? Does the program openly communicate its own history regarding diversity, or perhaps its lack of history, on its website and in recruitment materials? If inclusion is something only whispered about or avoided, you definitely don't have a robust climate.
Exactly. And finally, number 9 ties it all together: measurement and accountability. This involves looking at the program's external reputation. What do peers, alumni, potential students think about its commitment to diversity?
Yeah.
How is the diversity performance of the director and indeed the faculty actually evaluated and reported on? Do they conduct regular climate surveys of students, faculty, and staff to get honest feedback? And maybe the most telling indicator, what is the actual budgetary support dedicated to diversity-related activities? Accountability at the end of the day requires resources.
Okay, so that cultural audit provides a really clear internal roadmap of the gaps. Now we shift into the specific actions. What can MPA programs actually do to promote diversity in their daily practice based on this audit? Let's start with establishing that historical narrative.
Right. Action Area A. Knowing the diversity history. Documenting this history isn't just, about looking backwards or feeling good. It's actually a really important recruitment tool. Think
Yeah.
about it. If a potential student or faculty member, especially from an underrepresented group, can look at the program's materials and see a clear, acknowledged path of inclusion stretching back decades, it sends a powerful message. It suggests they aren't going to be the absolute first, the pioneer entering a potentially hostile or empty space. It shows progress.
And the sources get very specific about what should be in this narrative. They say you need to know and share the name and graduation year of the first female MPA student, and, critically important, the first minority MPA student. These individuals are foundational figures. They should be known and celebrated.
Absolutely. We also need to document recent enrollment patterns, say over the last 5 years, to show current trends and hopefully forward momentum. Furthermore, the narrative should highlight specific faculty's scholarly and service contributions in diversity-related areas. This helps legitimize that work within the program's history and track the historical development of any diversity-related required courses or electives. Show how the curriculum itself has evolved, hopefully demonstrating continuous improvement rather than just stagnation.
Okay, moving to Action Area B, valuing diversity in the curriculum. The sources make an important point here. They mention that a NASPA report back in 2000 highlighted a real need for curriculum resources. The argument then was that faculty maybe lacked the tools to integrate diversity effectively into core courses. But the sources today say emphatically that claiming a lack of resources is just no longer a reasonable excuse.
No, it really is an outdated rationalization at this point. Scholars across public administration and related fields have responded massively to that earlier call. Just look at the Journal of Public Affairs Education, JPAE, alone. They've published multiple symposia, tons of articles providing directly applicable scholarship. Not just abstract theory, but actual teaching methods, case studies, syllabi examples. This includes work looking at how to teach cultural competency effectively in MPA courses, research on what constitutes effective diversity management instruction, practical classroom techniques like using learning contracts in diversity courses. The resources are there.
So what you're saying is if a faculty member today claims they can't integrate diversity into, say, their core public management course because they don't have the resources, they're actually demonstrating a failure to engage with the current scholarship in their own field. It's not really about a lack of material anymore.
Precisely. The intellectual and pedagogical infrastructure for curriculum integration exists. Ignoring it is essentially a deliberate choice, and that choice reflects a cultural assumption that diversity is somehow secondary or maybe optional compared to the core public administration knowledge.
Okay, now we get into what feels like the most sensitive territory. Action Area C, promoting diversity-related scholarship. This really hits that intersection of academic values and faculty climate. This is directly addressing the nervous area within the faculty culture itself.
Yeah, this section gets to the heart of some real risks, particularly as the sources highlight, for women and minority faculty members. Research by Turner and others back in 1999 pointed out that faculty pursuing research topics connected to their own marginalized communities, well, they often face intense scrutiny. Higher standards seem to be applied to their work, sometimes outright criticism from tenure committees or senior colleagues who might view the work as too advocacy-oriented or maybe too narrow in scope.
That is a huge barrier to creating an inclusive environment. I mean, if you actively discourage minority faculty from researching the very areas they might be most passionately connected to and have unique insights into what happens, what career paths are they forced onto?
Well, Rivera and Ward in 2008 actually detailed 4 really problematic kind of forced options that often emerge. 1, the faculty member tries to assimilate. They suppress their cultural identity, maybe avoid topics related to their community, and pursue research deemed more acceptable or mainstream by the dominant group. This often comes at a great personal and intellectual cost. 2, They fight back. They challenge the system. They push for recognition of their work. But frequently, they end up being labeled as a problem faculty member, maybe seen as difficult or divisive, which can lead to professional isolation.
What are the other two options?
The third option is they start looking elsewhere. They actively pursue opportunities to move to more congenial and supportive institutions, places where their work is valued. This leads to a brain drain. In the less supportive programs, they lose talented faculty.
And the fourth?
And the fourth, which is really tragic, is that they simply give up. They might disengage from research, focus only on teaching or service, or even leave academia entirely because the climate is just too discouraging or hostile to their scholarly identity.
And this climate, this discouragement, it doesn't just affect current faculty, does it? It filters down to the next generation. You mentioned earlier that doctoral students sometimes get advice.
Yes, often seemingly well-intentioned, but actually deeply harmful advice. They're told to steer clear of diversity topics for their dissertation or early publications. Wait until you have tenure, they're advised, supposedly to increase their marketability on the job market.
Wow. That advice itself is such a profound statement at the system, isn't it? It's not just practical career tips. It's basically an open acknowledgement that bias and discrimination are active forces in academic hiring and promotion and tenure processes. It confirms that diversity research is still viewed by many gatekeepers as somehow second tier, maybe less rigorous, and therefore a professional risk to pursue early in one's career.
It absolutely is the systemic message concealed within seemingly helpful advice. When senior faculty offer that counsel, even with good intentions, they're passively supporting the existing discriminatory framework. They're essentially prioritizing the appearance of traditional scholarship or marketability within the existing bias system over the actual advancement of critical public administration fields like representative bureaucracy, social equity, or critical race theory within public affairs. This advice, if widely followed, actively suppresses the overall growth of diversity scholarship in the entire field.
So the solution here can't just be asking junior faculty to be brave. It requires concrete, systemic changes to the P&T process itself, to how research is valued. What specific actions do the sources suggest for directors and senior faculty? Table 9.3 outlines some of these, right? How do they fundamentally legitimize this area of research?
Yes, for directors, the first action is, frankly, revolutionary in some contexts. They must appoint peer review committees for promotion and tenure cases that are actually qualified to assess diversity research. Think about it. If a P&T committee is composed entirely of experts in, say, quantitative methods and public budgeting, they're simply not qualified to evaluate scholarship grounded in critical race theory, feminist methodology, or deep qualitative analysis of social equity issues. This mismatch inevitably leads to unfair, uninformed evaluations.
That makes perfect sense. What else should directors do?
The director must also intentionally assign senior faculty mentors to junior faculty who have demonstrably earned tenure based substantially on diversity-related research. Show junior faculty it can be done and provide guidance from someone who navigated it. And if those mentors don't exist within the program, the director needs to look externally. To allied fields, maybe urban planning, social work, sociology, other public policy departments at universities known for strong work in this area. Find mentors who can validate and guide this scholarship. And finally, provide tangible support. We're talking seed funding, maybe small grants, specifically dedicated to launching diversity-related scholarship. Budgetary support sends the absolute clearest signal that the program genuinely values this work. It's not just lip service.
Wait, so that's on the director. What about the senior faculty, even those whose own research isn't focused on diversity? What's their responsibility in changing this climate?
Senior faculty have crucial roles too. Even if it's not their specialty, they should proactively look for opportunities to co-author with junior faculty on diversity-related topics. Lending their established reputation and mentorship can be incredibly valuable for getting that work published and recognized. They also need to use their platforms. They must verbally articulate the value and rigor of diversity-related research in forums where it matters among journal editors during editorial board meetings, at conferences. They need to actively fight that lingering second-tier bias at the points where publication and dissemination decisions are made. And they should be proactive in proposing diversity topics for journal symposia or special issues, especially in mainstream public administration journals where this work might still be underrepresented. Force the field to engage more deeply.
The underlying message seems really clear here. If an MPA program continues to treat diversity research as just a niche specialty area, rather than recognizing it as an essential core component of understanding and improving public administration and policy, Well, they're not just failing their faculty, they're actively hindering the intellectual advancement of the entire profession.
That's exactly right. They're limiting the field's ability to address some of the most pressing public challenges we face.
Okay, we've talked about climate for students, curriculum, faculty scholarship. But the final, maybe the most undeniable, test of congruence of whether the walk matches the talk lies in institutional behavior, particularly the budget. The sources argue pretty forcefully that budgetary expenditures are the single most important, most revealing indication of a program's actual priorities, regardless of whatever values are beautifully articulated in the diversity plan.
Money talks. It really does. If a program claims, oh, we deeply prioritize social equity, but the annual budget shows zero dedicated funding for equity initiatives or related travel or speakers, well, that espoused value is basically meaningless in practice. So this requires a routine, detailed budgetary analysis, not just looking at this year's budget, but tracking allocations over time, reviewing the past few years' budgets to see the real patterns of investment or disinvestment.
What specifically should a cultural audit be looking for in the budget lines?
You need to look for dedicated allocations for things like conference and travel support. Is there specific funding set aside, for example, for faculty and students to attend the Social Equity Leadership Conference or the Conference of Minority Public Administrators? These are key professional development and networking opportunities. Does the department budget regularly sponsor diverse speakers to come to campus? And importantly, are those speakers paid adequately for their expertise and time, or are they expected to contribute out of goodwill?
And crucially, what about student support? What does the budget reveal about congruence there? How is inclusiveness actually conveyed in the distribution of things like graduate assistantships?
Exactly. Assistantships aren't just funding. They're powerful tools for professional socialization and opportunity. Are minority students equitably included in those highly valued roles? Roles where they get to work directly with faculty on sponsored research, maybe co-author papers, or hold positions with affiliated journals. The systematic exclusion of minority students from these vital high-status developmental roles reveals a program culture that, whatever its diversity goals say on paper, still reserves the most valuable opportunities for the majority group. The budget and appointment data will show that.
And beyond the dollars and cents, we circle back to those visible artifacts. Again, the images, the physical environment, just like the website images send messages, the departmental pictures hanging in the hallways, the artifacts displayed in conference rooms or common spaces, they all send powerful nonverbal signals about who is included, who is celebrated, who belongs.
There's a phenomenal example cited in the sources that really illustrates this point beautifully. It's the 5-foot by 50-foot mural titled Service at UNC Chapel Hill's Institute of Government. This massive piece of art depicts the 1960 Greensboro lunch counter sit-in, a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement.
And the power isn't just that it's art, it's the scale, the location, the subject matter itself, right? Having these life-size, unavoidable depictions of a critical moment in the fight for social equity right there in the daily environment. It forces students, many of whom are training to be future public officials, to constantly, maybe even subconsciously, contemplate that history, to think about social justice, their own values, and their future role in either upholding or failing the public service mission. It actively promotes a climate where difficult historical truths aren't just swept under the rug or ignored.
It's a constant visual reminder. And this brings us to what might be the ultimate congruence test, making sure that the actual discussions about diversity, those conversations happening firmly within that nervous area, especially in faculty meetings and during search committee deliberations. Making sure those discussions align with the values espoused in the program's official diversity plan. You simply cannot have a plan that champions diversity and inclusion only for faculty members in a closed-door meeting to rationalize not hiring a qualified minority applicant by saying something like, well, they probably would be happy here anyway, because the existing faculty is overwhelmingly non-diverse. That specific example comes from Rivera and Ward's work.
That kind of rationalization is a perfect example of a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? It uses the program's current failure, its lack of diversity, its poor climate, as the excuse to perpetuate that very failure. Those kinds of passive, responsibility-avoiding excuses completely undermine any genuine effort to foster real inclusiveness.
Completely. It maintains the status quo under the guise of concern.
Okay, so let's try to summarize the path forward then, especially for the folks using this as a study guide for PP 5340, Wrestling with Chapter 9. we've outlined what feels like a pretty clear, actionable methodology. The NASPA mandate, the accreditation standards, they provide the external push, the regulatory liver. The comprehensive cultural audit, using those 9 categories, provides the essential diagnosis, that gap analysis between the ideal and the reality, and then the internal actions focusing on knowing and sharing the program's history, truly integrating diversity into the curriculum, providing real professional support for diversity scholarship, and ensuring budgetary and symbolic alignment. Those provide the necessary cure, the path to closing the gap.
Implementing a genuine climate of inclusiveness. It's definitely not rocket science, as the saying goes. The tools are there, the scholarship exists, as we've discussed, but the sources are equally clear on this point. It is not a naturally occurring state of affairs. It doesn't just happen on its own. It requires immense, sustained willpower from leadership and faculty. It demands that the program chair, the director, and the faculty actively promote an active, inclusive diversity practice. Not passive tolerance, but active practice. And that practice needs clear, measurable, and documented performance indicators that are actually tied to things like promotion, rewards, and accountability.
So, this critical self assessment, this willingness to operate continuously within that potentially uncomfortable, nervous area of government, it's just non negotiable for real progress. If programs choose passive support or they keep retreating into those rationalizations and excuses we talked about, they are, in effect, actively choosing to maintain the status quo, which often includes discrimination and exclusion.
I keep coming back to Shine's model, especially that deepest level, the unconscious assumptions. This whole conversation, this whole chapter really, hinges on the willingness to surface and challenge those unspoken rules, the way we do things around here. End quote. So for you, the listener, whether you're a student right now in PP 5340, maybe you're already a public manager out in the field, or perhaps you're a faculty member yourself, the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. Take a moment, maybe later today or this week, to really analyze your own work environment, your own organization or program. Can you identify just one artifact? Maybe something on the wall, a common practice, a recurring story, or one norm, one unspoken rule that you suspect reflects a deeply held, maybe unconscious assumption about who belongs, who succeeds, or what kind of work is truly valued. And ask yourself, does that assumption need challenging today? What would it take to start that conversation?